everybody. Welcome in. This is For the Love of Language, a podcast with me, Stacey the Linguist, and
me, Authentically EJ. And I think this is actually our 10th episode.
oh my God, that's crazy. We've been doing this for a while now. I'm very excited. We've gotten a lot of good feedback from people. And it's great to hear that people are enjoying the pod and learning new things and enjoying our company and all that fun jazz.
Yeah, definitely. We're super, super excited about it. And we would also love to get more comments or questions if you want to send them in to us.
Yeah. And again, you can hit us up on Instagram at For the Love of Language. Feel free to send us messages there. If you are like finding us through Twitch or have Discord, you can also find my Discord, which is linked in the Twitch sections here. And so you can pop in my Discord and shoot me some messages there if you have questions or comments or thoughts you'd love to share.
Yeah. But what did we want to talk about today, Stacey?
Oh, Lord. So I had suggested, because we had talked a little bit about, computational languages, whether like programming languages were considered languages. I threw out the idea to EJ that maybe they could help educate us about linguistics and the world of technology in general, something that I'm not super familiar with, but EJ has a lot more experience. So maybe this is more of like a let's hear about what EJ does episode, because we had a whole episode about what Stacey does, but what does EJ do?
Yeah, I wouldn't say that I actually do a lot of computational linguistic stuff, but I do find it fascinating. And so like the main things that come to mind for me in that topic are probably machine translation and sentiment analysis. Those are like the first things that come to mind. And like I said, I haven't personally done a lot with them, but I did like write one sentiment analysis script when I was in college for a linguistics programming class. And obviously I've used machine translation an awful lot.
Mm-hmm. Tell us, define those things a little bit further for us, would you?
Yeah, for sure. Sentiment analysis is basically trying to understand the emotion. So when we're talking about language, that can come through which words are used, what tone is used. But then if you take words in isolation, of course, that's not going to actually tell you what sentiment is there, because you have things like negation. So if you had the word happy and you said that that's a very positive thing, and then you said not happy, that totally flips it to be a negative thing. So there's a lot of complexity that actually goes into sentiment analysis. But yeah, it's figuring out the feeling or the emotion behind language generally. And then machine translation is probably more familiar for most people, but basically instead of having a human translating something, you're trying to have a computer do it. And translation is different from interpretation. I'm just gonna throw this little plug in here.
Anyone who spent like a minute and a half with Google Translate will know that it's not capturing everything. Like it is just a direct translation. It's not interpretation.
Right. And like in a very technical sense, interpretation is generally spoken language. Versus translation is used more with written language. But yeah, that's definitely a flaw with machine translation, is that, computers don't actually understand what they're translating.
So let me kind of prod in a little bit on sentiment analysis, and then I'll kind of link it back, because I have several questions from what you've said already. With sentiment analysis, are people looking at written words specifically, or are they incorporating like voice, like any sort of vocal processes at all?
That's a really good question. I'm sure that there are people doing it with voice. I've mostly heard of it being done with text. And a lot of the time, if there is voice, it will be transcribed into text,
Oh,
which
interesting.
can be done automatically with a
Yeah.
computer, right? But then that allows you to search and do other things much more easily.
Do you use in sentiment analysis? Do they use Toby? I'm getting a little bit technical for some people. Toby is a system that was created for prosody. So it's a way to mark and indicate pitch contours when you speak through a sentence. And it's sort of like a sort of program, a way to demarcate those types of things that people in the world of prosody, people who study rhythms and patterns in like sentence structures, it's something that they use to analyze speech.
Yeah, that's really cool. I think that would definitely be super, super useful. Like I said, I haven't personally done that,
Mm-hmm.
but it sounds like definitely a good way to go about it. An interesting thing with that though is that pitch, intonation, tone, those things are all language dependent.
Mm-hmm.
So for instance, in English, I can get like a very angry tone. And in some languages that might not actually sound angry at all. Or in English, for questions, I'm going to go up at the end of a sentence,
Mm-hmm.
versus in Russian, I'm going to go up on the actual question word and then come back down at the end of a sentence to form a question.
Right.
And I think it would be the same thing, like would be reflected if you're trying to analyze something for emotion. You'd have to do it separately by language to
Mm-hmm.
account for those differences in intonation.
Yeah. No, intonational and prosodic studies are definitely language specific because there is like a lot of variety. There are some like, of course, us linguists, we're trying to look for some of the universal threads that might be like throughout a bunch of different languages. But you're right that every language kind of has its own unique contours. So within sentimental analysis, because they're kind of looking mostly at like written stuff, I'm assuming that's also like language specific as well, or so they're mostly just trying to analyze the sentiments within a certain language.
Yeah, so probably I could explain like the easiest way to actually do this.
Mm-hmm.
And what I did in my linguistics programming class as an assignment was that we wrote a Python script, and you would have basically two lists of words. So I would have a list of words that are positive and that I've labeled positive, and then I'd have a separate file of words that I labeled negative. So like the positive file could have things like happy, great, amazing, excellent, and the negative file would have, the opposite words
Mm-hmm.
from those: terrible, repulsive, unhappy, like all of those different things. And so you have these two separate word lists. And then in your script or in your code, what you can do is basically take any piece of text that you have and go through and basically count the negative words and the positive words, comparing them to those lists. And then you could come up with a score for
Mm.
that text. Now, obviously, there's a lot of flaws to doing it this way.
Yeah.
And yeah, you can add complexity by then taking in modifiers and adverbs, taking in things like not or very and extremely, and making those change your scores as well.
Mm-hmm.
But that's probably like the most basic way to do sentiment analysis. If you want to
Interesting.
improve past that point, you can also use machine learning, which you'd be taking a bunch of inputs, and there's multiple ways to do machine learning as well.
Yes.
But one of them is you would take a bunch of inputs and pass them into a machine learning algorithm and pass them in with trainer values to begin with. So I would pass in a sentence that I know is positive and also pass in the score, and then pass in a ton of examples like that to train the machine learning algorithm. And then you pass in other phrases once you've given it a ton of data, and then it can spew out whatever score based on, what your goal was and what you were passing in.
Yeah, very interesting. Yeah. I feel like like you said, it initially can start out pretty simplistic. I'm already like, as a linguist, adding all these layers. I'm like, but what about this and what about that? And of course, you would need some more complex programming to really capture that. But that's very fascinating.
Yeah. Well, and another thing with that is that even humans don't do this perfectly, right?
Oh yeah.
Like you'll see a lot of the time people don't like having difficult conversations over any kind of text format. People prefer to do
Mm-hmm.
those face to face because the tone comes through much better. Like it's very difficult to look at a text and tell whether or not something is sarcastic, for instance.
Yes.
And so, even individuals looking at something are going to have varying opinions of what the emotion actually is. And
Mm-hmm.
so, there's a lot of ambiguity, and that makes it also difficult to, train a machine to do the same thing when we can't even do it well.
Yeah, exactly. So you mentioned these two things, like machine translation and sentiment analysis. Do you know if people are trying to combine these two to make a more intuitive translation model?
So, like I mentioned, that machine learning can be used for sentiment analysis. That's also being used more and more now for machine translation. So, like in that sense, there's a similarity in how they can be gone about.
Mm-hmm.
I think, emotion is obviously a vital part of translation
Yeah.
in a lot of ways. So, I mean, there's going to be overlap in that you're always going to be translating emotional texts,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm not thinking of like a use case for deliberately combining them necessarily off the top of my head.
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, I always wonder because like the goals that people have in the tech industry when it comes to language are often very different from the goals that we as linguists have. Sometimes they overlap, like if people are talking about artificial intelligence and trying to come up with some sort of algorithm to essentially create some natural type of language, which by the way, we're nowhere close to doing. Um, because we barely understand human language itself, let alone like replicating it in a computer. It's so complicated.
Have you heard about like some of the failed attempts at doing that? Like
Yeah.
Microsoft's Tay AI bot on Twitter, I think.
Uh-huh. I've heard of a couple of things. And of course there's that like really creepy robot that I saw on like Jimmy Fallon's show at one point that's like looks really lifelike and will actually like engage with you.
Mm.
But something that I don't think a lot of people know is while that sounds really natural, a lot of those artificial intelligences are not based on like actually reproducing language patterns. They're based off of statistical models of what is likely to be said next, given like predictable interactions, which is
Definitely.
not language itself.
Yeah, and it also leads to problems. So like
Yes.
when I brought up Microsoft's Tay AI bot, I think it's TAY, you can like find articles and stuff about it. Microsoft released this AI on Twitter, and the idea was that it would be interacting with people and learn from those interactions.
Yeah.
But of course, humans are not always the most kind to experiments like that, let's say. And
Yeah.
so Tay, this, AI bot started spouting off actually very, very offensive stuff extremely quickly because of the input that people were giving it. And
Mm-hmm.
Microsoft had to shut that project down.
Oh my God. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's super interesting. There's actually been more recent examples of that. I think I saw an article about Amazon's Alexa,
Mm-hmm.
and like a little kid was asking it about, to give challenges, and it actually asked the kid to do something pretty dangerous with like an electrical outlet, because it's not actually intelligent. It's just
Yeah.
pulling things from searches and from data. And
Yeah.
so obviously Amazon tries to crack down on that stuff really fast. And so like that particular instance is never going to happen again. And the developers can react extremely quickly when they get feedback right now. Like
Mm-hmm.
a lot of development has moved to an agile model in the last several years. which basically means that instead of having a big project idea from the get-go and then like working for a year to deliver that massive project, which would be what's called a waterfall model. Instead, we have the agile model, which is like you're developing things in very small increments and trying to release things as quickly as possible so that you can get customer feedback and pivot along the way. So a lot of companies will actually like have continuous deployment or close to continuous, where like I could write code, and once it's been reviewed, quality assurance has looked at it, it's been tested and whatnot, I merge that into our main branch, and it can actually be used by customers a lot of the time within a day.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, from a linguistic standpoint, as a linguist, as someone who's not in the tech industry, something that is adaptable does seem more appealing, purely from like a language standpoint, because language is very adaptive. And while again, Amazon's Alexa, Siri, all that stuff, again, they function on like statistical models. They don't necessarily function on purely linguistic models because those aren't stable enough yet. It is very interesting to see how they can tweak those statistical models when they find language that is maybe not appropriate or called for, and they can kind of filter some of that through their models.
Definitely. And that's actually can be an issue with like sentiment analysis as well. Like no matter how fast software and stuff is tweaked, there's always changes happening to language in real time. So someone will introduce a new acronym or a new word, and like a model isn't going to know how to deal with that from the get-go.
Yeah. So can you tell us, EJ, a little bit about what you have done with like language in the tech industry? Because we've mentioned it a couple of times, but I would love to hear some more details.
Yeah, the main thing that I've actually done with language, because the company that I work for is not linguistically focused in any way. It's just I mean, it's a great software company, but it's just not language focused.
Yeah.
But because it's a larger software company, there is a need to have the software obviously be usable by people across the globe. And so the main thing that plays into that is internationalization. And so there's two like different words that are kind of related that are used a lot here. There's internationalization, which is frequently shortened to it's called a numeronym, I-18N, because you have 18 letters between the I and the N. And then you have localization, which is sometimes shortened to L10N, another numeronym, because there's 10 letters between the L and the N. But internationalization is making something usable more broadly. And localization is then adapting it to a specific locale. So for internationalization, what that means in software a lot of the time is that instead of writing, your separate code files and putting in your words in each separate file, so like you might have a file for your main page that says welcome to the user or has login and stuff. You don't want to have those words login and welcome and all of these different things be in different files in your code. You want to consolidate them into a single file and then have all of the different files pull from that single file that has all the words in it. And by doing that, you're able to just send the file with all of your words to your translators. And then you can get that same file back in different languages. And then your code that's pulling these words will just pull from, I guess, the right file for each language. And so a lot of, languages, a lot of systems actually even have this kind of built in at this point. So like if you were to do Google's Android Kotlin course. So Kotlin is the programming language that's generally used for programming Android apps at this point. In Google's online course to learn how to do this, which is totally free, anyone can access it. It's actually really great for beginners. they in their course they talk about how you're supposed to put all of your words inside of this single file, and that enables translation to be done really, really easily. So
Mm,
there's that with like words and getting translations. One thing that I've also worked on is dates.
okay.
And
Oh
so
yeah, because dates have like a totally different format too, depending on where you're at.
yeah, dates can have very, very different formats. And so there's, for most things in code, there's at least things that are like very generic. There's
Hmm.
existing libraries that you can use. And so there's a moment.js library that's, I think it's an MIT library
Hmm.
that you can use for a lot of your date functionality. But even if you're using these external libraries, obviously you need to make your internal code compatible with it. So you need to be
Right.
calling the right functions from the external library, making sure that everything is organized and being used and displaying properly. So that's that's a lot of the stuff that I've been involved in with
Hmm.
internationalization. I'm maybe in the future I'll work for a language learning app, be able to do things more directly.
Hmm.
But that's kind of what I've done.
Yeah. Would you say that let me rephrase. Do you use your linguistics degree in your everyday life at work? Or like does it kind of like have the things that you learned kind of like shown in your work in any way?
Like, I wouldn't say that it comes up every day,
Hmm.
but because I am the only software engineer at my work that I'm aware of with a linguistics background, or at least like a linguistics degree. There's plenty of people who speak other languages and,
Yeah.
have some hobby type interest in linguistics.
Yeah, I mean, you find that everywhere. People love to communicate.
Yeah, which is fantastic. I
Yeah.
love that people are interested in it. But because I have more of that experience, like that's definitely part of why I was initially put on our I-18N project. But then, once we had everything set up so different, languages function properly, then there wasn't a lot more to do for
Hmm.
that specifically. And so, I've given a couple internal trainings to make sure that new people who are hired know about how to use our internationalization framework. So I've given trainings. People will often add me to code reviews
Hmm.
if there's questions about I-18N. So anytime that a software engineer writes code, there's going to be usually two other engineers who will review that code, which is basically like,
Quality control.
yeah, whenever you publish a book, there's always going to be editors as well as an
Yeah.
author. And so yeah, it's a great way to spread knowledge about the code that's being written, and it's also great, to make sure that we're not missing things that could become bugs, and that our code is consistent and has high quality and stuff like that. So people on different teams throughout the company I work for will frequently add me to code reviews if there are questions about internationalization, because there are some more complex things that go into it. Like I
Yeah.
mentioned how you want to put all of your strings, or that's a programming type basically for words or
Hmm.
sentences. So you want to put all of those into a single file, but then there's complexity that comes in, for example, with pluralization, because different languages do pluralization very differently. In English, we have a singular form and a plural form, and that's pretty much it, right?
Hmm.
And in the zero case in English, we use the plural form, like there's no cats or dogs. There's one cat, one dog. There's lots of cats, lots of dogs. Like there's
Hmm.
only those two forms. But in languages, the one that I'm most familiar with that does this is Russian. In Russian, there's multiple plural forms. So
Yes.
I'm
Lots of
going
cases.
lots of cases, but also just like the number is different. So, for
Yeah.
instance, if I'm going to say one dog in Russian, that's going to be adna sabaka, and sabaka is the word for dog. If there's two of them, the word for dog becomes sabaki. And then if there's like 5 of them or 6 of them, then it would be sabak. And
Mhm.
so like the word dogs is actually different depending on if there's, 2 dogs or 8 dogs.
Right.
And there's actually languages that have many more plural forms than even
Yeah.
Russian does. So
Mhm.
how do you translate that? Or like when we have, I guess, a 1-to-1 ratio between, the number of English strings or English, phrases that we have and the
Right.
number of Russian phrases that we have, how can we account for there being more Russian forms than there are English forms?
Right.
And there's actually existing libraries and formats that help you handle that.
Mhm.
But you need to like properly label things numerically in English so that then the translators can properly use the format to add the right number of forms in Russian, and your code can be properly pulling them. So there's areas like that that get a little bit more interesting and complex, and that you know software engineers might not think of if you don't have trainings and teach about them.
Yeah, exactly. Our friend in chat, Zabadian, who's a moderator for us. Thank you, Zabadian, for being amazing. I know that he is also in the tech industry, and he says you also need to take sentence length into account for the layout of your application.
Yes, that's a huge thing. So if there's some languages that statistically tend to be longer than other languages. So
Yeah.
I think German statistically tends to have longer phrases than English does. Obviously, that's not going to be every single phrase. There's going to be instances where a translated phrase is going to be shorter in German than it is in English. But when you're like testing translations and stuff, it's useful to be able to test with languages that tend to be longer, or you can
Mhm.
also do things like replace all of your words with an arbitrary set of characters, and just like arbitrarily make it longer for testing purposes.
Yeah.
But it is important to consider that, especially if you're making text boxes, doing things in your
Mhm.
layouts that are very space specific.
Yeah.
Then maybe you'll want to add tooltips. Maybe you'll want to use icons more. There's a lot of different ways to handle it. Yes, lorem ipsum is a fantastic just example of basically filler text.
Mhm.
That's like just Latin filler text that we use in examples. So that's something you can use as well, but it's definitely super important to take into account. And usually it's UX, or that's the shortened form of user experience
Mhm.
designers, who will actually plan and design the layouts, and then software engineers will implement them.
Mhm.
But it's also very important for software engineers to bring up these edge cases and questions when they come up, to make sure that we're addressing things, because no one thinks of everything from the get-go. It's
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. And you put something in the hands of regular people and they're gonna find some sort of hole with it. There's always some aspect of the human experience that people might not, that especially like engineers might not consider. I've been watching Silicon Valley with my partner, and that was like one of the big like stumbling blocks in them like releasing this software, was they're like, this is not user friendly. Like people don't know how to like this doesn't look good. It's not intuitive. Like normal people don't know how to work around something like an engineer does.
mm-hmm. Yeah, it's super interesting. And like even on a software engineering team, there's people with different priorities and different things that they focus on. So like
Yeah.
it can be easy to kind of get pigeonholed and forget about the broader picture if, like, as a software engineer, you're just thinking, I want to make this work.
Yeah, exactly.
And the designers and the product managers and the quality assurance, like everyone has these slightly different goals that all tie into the bigger goal of creating excellent software and a great user experience. But there's a lot of things that need to be considered.
Yeah. Do you think that people who have a background in like linguistics or the humanities are especially useful in like engineering and software development fields?
So that's a really, really interesting question. I wouldn't say that I'm like more useful or more important than anyone with any other background.
Of course. But like, does it kind of give you a unique perspective?
I think it's important to have a diversity of perspectives.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you don't have anyone with a linguistics background or who's going to ask these questions, then maybe you have a gap. The same way, like if you don't have someone who's really comfortable with algorithms and performance, like
Right.
you do need all of those different perspectives, and there's examples of that, and of failures of that in tech. Like the example that comes to mind is maybe facial recognition or speech
Mm.
recognition software. If you're only training things with white men, for example, then your software might not work well
Yeah.
for people, of other races and other genders. And so there's actually been some fairly, controversial examples of software failing because of things like that. Or maybe you're only thinking of right-handed people because everyone on
Mm-hmm.
your team is right-handed, and so your design neglects to account for the massive amount of people that are left-handed, just because there's no one with those qualities on your team. So I think it's definitely important to have diversity, have people asking those questions. If
Yeah.
you're only ever working with people with the exact same background as you, you're probably going to have holes in whatever you're creating.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, it's very interesting because, the tech industry is really kind of, what's booming. And it seems like everybody has sort of like a tech adjacent job. And so I know a lot of people who go to school who like get their undergrads in something like history or sociology or something. They're like, well, I don't quite know what to do with this degree. And I think it's important to know that there is a space for those mindsets, for the things that you learned while you were in that degree. And like having those skills makes you a valuable member of society.
Definitely. Yeah. And like for me, when I was getting my bachelor's degree in linguistics, my university was actually strongly encouraging everyone to, at least take a couple of computer science classes and,
Yeah.
get even a little bit of experience. Because even if you don't become a software engineer, even if you're not working in these fields, it enables you to think about things and connect with people a little bit differently when you know more
Mhm.
about it. And I think that goes with any field. Like it's always good to branch out a little bit and
Yeah.
gain a little bit of different experience. But even if you're not interested in like the software side, I mean, for me, I work as a software engineer, but there's plenty of people on the teams that I've been on that don't actually have technical backgrounds. For instance, product managers there's hopefully about a product manager per team, who's the person who's doing user research and figuring out, what should we be developing? What are the things that actually matter for our users, and helping to find that roadmap. And they don't necessarily need to have a super technical background as long as they can communicate and collaborate well with the engineers. Same thing for like quality assurance actually pulls in people from a ton of different and varied backgrounds. And
Yeah.
they actually really, really like that, because the goal of quality assurance is like thinking outside the box, thinking,
Yeah.
how can are people going to use this in ways that we don't expect, and how can we make sure that we're accounting for all those different edge cases. So
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for educating us about this. I know we kind of steered a little bit away from language, but the language and the tech industry are very intimately connected these days, especially as like technology is in the hands of people, and the ability to make tech accessible for people around the world is super important. Making sure people can use tech in their own languages is super important. And just understanding that language got us where we are with tech. And so we kind of, it's just an integral part of it that we don't often consider.
Yeah, definitely. And there's so many different fields where language and tech actually can coincide and come together. Like, we've only talked about a few different things, but
oh yeah, we haven't even gotten into like NLPs and stuff. Like,
yeah,
we're scratching the surface. Like we could spend a whole other podcast talking about this stuff.
Yeah, we certainly could.
But it's been great to hear about what you do and like your experiences with language and tech. Is there anything else you'd like to share with us?
That's a great question. There's nothing really specific that comes to mind. I think it's a super, super interesting topic. And like, if you are interested in learning more about it, you can, Google different things. When I was doing my linguistics programming class, actually, which was my only programming class in college that wasn't actually in the computer science department, the first thing that we did was actually the Code Academy Python course, which is a free online course that like starts from zero and gets you doing some coding in Python. So like, I guess the main thing that I would say is just, if you are interested in tech, but you haven't really done anything with it, there's a lot of free ways to pick up a little bit of tech knowledge and experience with different online courses and things, and to see if it's interesting to you. But yeah, even if you don't want to dive into it, I think it's a super interesting topic also from a theoretical standpoint. So hopefully this answered some questions and made you think about some different things.
Yeah, definitely. And I encourage everyone to get a little bit of a programming background. I am notoriously bad with computers. It's a miracle I'm capable of streaming because I'm not very well versed in computers, but it is very important, not just for, everyday life, but it's also becoming more important within the field of linguistics to have a little bit of a programming background. So in case y'all are wondering, I'm going to be learning a little bit of Python over the summer. Won't be as good as EJ, but it is something something I think that is valuable. So thank you for sharing with us, EJ.
Yeah, thank you. It's always fun. And like we mentioned before, do follow For the Love of Language on Instagram. Get in touch with us. We stream live if you follow Stacy the Linguist here on Twitch. But thank you so much for tuning in.
Thank you all, everybody. And we will see you hopefully next week. My finals are coming up real quick. So we'll see how much time I need to dedicate to finishing up those papers. But we'll find a way. Thank you again, EJ, so much. And thank you to everyone who's joining us. Again, if you have questions or you would like us to talk more about a specific subject, please just let us know and we'd be more than happy to indulge you. Until next time, friends.